the reaction why he who remains used to be Iron Lad, Avengers, King, Dynasty. Let's take a look, see what the Marvel Wave has to say about that, and check it out.
The innate complexity of the multiverse saga and the intricacy within which the MCU handles splinter timelines is among the most complex storylines in the Marvel Universe to date, and it just might mean that the end of the multiversal saga may have already taken place. During the Loki series, we see Loki and Sylvie confront He Who Remains in the Citadel at the end of time, taking place outside of the multiverse itself, where time and space essentially do not exist. While we spent months sifting through exactly what this means for the multiverse going forward, the most drastic implication is the fact that the multiverse itself and the multiversal war seems to be a predestined course of history that we can predict by looking directly into the past. This also means that He Who Remains is almost certain to make a return in the next few years, growing into the same multiversal executioner that we see in Loki. But is it possible that when we get a closer look at He Who Remains, we might actually come to find out who he may have been at one point in time, and may have actually been a hero in his own right? Well, stick with us today, watchers of the Marvel Multiverse, and let's discuss the theory that He Who Remains was actually a hero of his timeline and the comic book precedent for this concept. We know that He Who Remains is one of the less malicious variants of Kang the Conqueror, and his motivations are largely different from those of his multiversal counterparts. Most Kangs, so far as we know, have their sights set on conquest, ravaging entire timelines and ruling over universes with an iron fist. They seek dominance and control, and while there are certainly very few exceptions, there are some, including He Who Remains, who is the most notable Kang variant we've met so far. He Who Remains just wants the conflict to end, and to restore peace to the fabric of reality, which is inherently a noble goal. We also know that several Kang variants have done time as a hero in the original concept material, and He Who Remains was largely inspired by a variant of Kang from the comics known as Immortus, who actually lived as a hero for a considerable amount of time in the original comic book line. A brief disclaimer before we get into this, though, is the story of Kang can get innately complex, and this will be an attempt to simplify the original stories. But there is much more to this particular variant of Kang than we have time to explain today in full. The Kang variant known as Immortus, however, comes from Earth 6311, a reality wherein humanity never encountered the Dark Ages. And at the age of 16, this version of Kang came to learn about his villainous future and sought to rectify this change. Before becoming the variant known as Immortus, however, he cycled through several other identities, including perhaps his most prominent alias, that being his superhero persona of Iron Lad. As the successor of the Iron Mantle, he spent much of his early life as a hero and sought to undo his fate by becoming a superhero and helping those in the end, done in a desperate effort not to become a Kang. So then, what exactly would it mean for the MCU moving forward if He Who Remains was none other than Iron Lad before ultimately retiring to the Citadel at the end of time, much like his comic book counterpart did? As again, He Who Remains takes direct inspiration from Immortus. What implications would this have for the future and the past of the multiversal war? And most importantly, how would this reframe Loki and Sylvie's encounter with him at the end of time, or rather, the beginning of the conflict? In the comics, a version of Kang from the future intervened to protect Nathaniel from a near-fatal injury, and in doing so, introduced him to not only the advanced armor and technology that he'd come to use on his adventures, but also a glimpse into the nature of his very future self. He saw the bloodshed and conquest, and sought to avoid this future at all costs. And in the MCU, this might prove to be an incredibly compelling character arc for a Kang variant to take. In the MCU, we know that the Young Avengers are slowly taking shape, with several young characters being set up as the next generation. And Iron Lad is known for being a young Avenger quite prominently in the comics. Not only was he a close friend to many of them, but he actually cultivated a relationship with Cassie Lang, who is now set to become a far more integral part of the MCU moving forward. Her future and stature seems to be imminent, as she is being prepared to graduate into a full-time hero. Then her relationship with Nathaniel Richards might take its leap to the big screen. If this also happens in the MCU, then we could see a variant of Kang fighting alongside the Young Avengers against variants of his future self, and it could also add much more emotional weight to his eventual destiny. If he begins to see this war as futile, then he may elect to take more drastic means in the name of peace, and we could see this hero slowly change and potentially begin to morph into the individual who we already know is destined to destroy the multiverse. This, however, isn't mere speculation, as there's also a precedent for this in the very same series of comic lines that we're referring to.
Mhm.
For years, he fought alongside the Avengers, befriending them and becoming incredibly close allies with the team. But this relationship would soon prove to be short-lived, as the time strain began taking damage due to the displacement, and began to realize that the only way to save the timeline and the formation of the Young Avengers was to return and resume his identity as Kang the Conqueror. After killing a variant of himself, Iron Lad realized that if he didn't return, the Young Avengers might never be formed, and the time strain could be in imminent peril. His return to the future, however, didn't immediately make him malicious or set him in search for bloodshed. Instead, he sought to understand the time strain and learn how to affect the flow of it without hurting others, setting into motion the shift into Immortus and the being that we know. He traveled across the multiverse, trying to undo the calamity caused by other variants and restore as many timelines to peace as he could, which seems to bear a striking resemblance to the version of He Who Remains that we know in the modern MCU from Loki, who we know took inspiration from this version of Kang. We know that he was a researcher, and his retirement to the Citadel is almost a perfect mirror of Immortus from the comics. But we also know how his retirement came to be. The one true way to undo the carnage caused by his variants was to eliminate the timeline from which they came, preserving just one and allowing it to live in relative peace and harmony for eternity. But this brings us directly back to Loki. When he ultimately returns to the Citadel, we as an audience will have the context that he was once a great hero, and we might have even come to care about him a great deal, all the while knowing exactly what fate has in store for him. If this scene takes place, then Loki, Sylvie, wouldn't be confronting just a random variant of a tyrant, but they'd be confronting a fallen hero who turned to drastic means in order to save the lives of those that he loved, ensuring that the Young Avengers came to be and would continue to live on in the timeline. This would add an incredible amount of depth to the final variant of Kang, who is most likely set to close out the multiversal saga. And this could entail an incredible amount of depth and complexity that we didn't get to see in the season finale of Loki, at least not yet. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of this theory? Do you think He Who Remains was Iron Lad before his retirement? And do you think we'll see Iron Lad in the MCU?
Definitely.
And if we do, will he eventually become the variant known as He Who Remains?
Please subscribe, like this video. For watching. Great night. See you guys. Bye.